Hi everyone, this is Dr. Strickland, and in our next lecture series I want to talk a little bit about the cognitive and emotional development of children up to the age of 3. Now once we get into age 3, we're getting into early childhood development, and that will be our next lecture series that I will discuss. So just to kind of give a synopsis of information that I feel that's important for you to know during the first 3 years of development, and that's extremely important in the cognitive and emotional stage of human development. So in cognitive stage, one of the most important theorists that really gave us in developmental psychology a foundation and a baseline to understand how children think from infancy up to 3 years was Jean Piaget. Now, Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist, and in his theory, he developed more of a qualitative theory. He believed that children pass through these cognitive stages from infancy up to adolescence. And through biological pressures and interaction in the environment, children start to learn and understand what is around them. Now again, his is a qualitative, so through a qualitative process, children begin to interact in their environment and make sense of their environment through what he called schemes. And through these schemas, these cognitive concepts, we put into order, we try to understand and make sense of what everybody else is telling us around the world. And so through these cognitive concepts and this understanding, we assimilate information that has been previously told to us, and then we accommodate for new information. So let me just stop there and kind of explain it, because I know you're reading it in your chapters and you've had a couple of questions. So think about it this way. When a child is born, they have no idea what a dog is. We'll say dog, because I know many of you have dogs as pets, and I have dogs too. You tell that child what it is. The child points. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but pointing is actually in our gene code, and it's in the gene code of dogs too. So if you've been around infants or you've seen infants out in the environment, you know that they point. Every time they see something, they point. And whoever is holding them, whoever the caregiver, they basically say what that is. And in that child's mind, they're having to form this concept of what this thing is, this object is. So say, for instance, you have a dog in the house. Now, you as the parent or caregiver are probably going to say either the name of the dog, or you're going to say dog or puppy. So you may say, like for me, I have a dog, a collie named Thor. So I may say that's Thor. I say that's a dog, or that's a puppy. Well, in that child's mind, he's trying to put this card catalog, this concept of what that is. And so through his senses, he is going to touch it, taste it. You know how kids are. They fall on it with their mouths open. They're going to pull on the tail. They're going to look at it visually. They're going to hear it. They're going to do all these things to form that concept of what that dog is. So you think about an infant, they have this one card catalog in their mind that's dog or puppy. And if they're a little bit older, of course, they try to say that. So everything becomes dog and puppy. That's it. They have one concept. And so the next day they're out and this creature walks by and they think dog, puppy, they're trying to say it, and you go, no, cat. Okay, cat. So think about it. A dog and a cat are pretty similar. Two eyes, one tail, 4 legs, 2 ears. I'm not sure if I would want to taste a cat, but to the child, the infant, that is a dog, and you're saying, no, that's a cat. But what is the one thing that a child can assimilate from what you've said about a dog into a cat? The sound. And that's probably what we teach kids. So you have to think about, this child is in this world qualitatively trying to understand all the different things that you're saying, it's coming out of your mouth, going into his ears. He's trying to make sense of all this. And so we can take what we know previously and we can assimilate it. So now the child's out and the child points up and you go, no, bird. Okay, well, bird is completely different. That's avians. That's a completely different category. So now the child has to accommodate for a whole new category of what you're teaching it. So Piaget believed that kids go through this process of this assimilation, this accommodation. So I hope I'm kind of explaining it that way. It makes a little sense. And so his first stage is actually called sensory motor, and this is from birth to 2. Now, once we get past 2, we get into more of the pre-operational. But what is important at the end of 2 is that the child begins to mentally put into their mind symbols of what all of these objects and names are. So what we mean by object permanence is that they know that objects exist even though they can't see them. So if you say rattle or you say blanket, that infant at 2 has an idea of what that is. He has a mental image of what that is. And believe it or not, your dogs know the same thing. Dogs do actually have object permanence. I mean, I've done that with my dog. I'm sure you've done it with your dog as well. So, you can understand that's the very foundation and beginning of learning, how learning takes place. So make sure that you understand that. Also, to conditioning. Being a former marine mammal trainer, people do ask me a lot about training, and they even ask me about their kids. I mean, when you think about when can kids start learning, you can condition an infant. If I can train your puppy not to pee on the carpet, you're more than capable of training an infant. You can condition. And classical conditioning, just like we've read before, Pavlov, that's like ringing the bell and putting the meat powder on the dog's tongue. And it makes that association. Classical conditioning is about association. And so any type of stimulus that's out there, and you pair that with anything that's biological, you can actually train that. So yes, feeding is, eating. Feeding is, you need the nourishment. That's a biological aspect of who you are. As a mother or a caregiver, you can play a piece of music, but only play that piece of music when you're feeding. I know I'm getting to animal training here, but it's the same principles with human development as well. You can play a certain sound, you can sing, you can caress the infant as they're eating. They're making that connection that when mother holds me that way, or when she plays that song, what am I getting next? I'm getting food. So we begin our first habits. We become habitual to certain behaviors. We start routines with infants. So conditioning and learning actually begins very, very early on. And they will imitate too. We start to imitate behaviors that we see around us. They're trying to understand what you're doing. If you're putting something in your mouth, they're going to want to put something in their mouth too. But one of the most important developmental milestones, the first 2 years, and I cannot stress enough, is language. Because once the child begins to try his first words, which is around 9 and 10 months, and they're trying to imitate what you're saying, so watch what you're saying, everything will go from being symbolic and will go to language. So memory starts. You think about how memory starts in short-term memory and long-term memory, but a child is within that short-term memory. You're having to repeat things. You're saying things over and over because they have to learn it, they have to work it. And so they're learning how to put all of the objects that you have been saying to them into their mind through language now. Once that language starts and they hear it, and I can't stress enough how fast it starts. You think by 9 or 10 months they're starting to repeat their first words. By 16 months, they're learning up to 400 words. I mean, once that language in that brain starts, it changes. And what I said in the physical development, the first couple of years, you've got the cerebellum, and now you're going to be getting into that cerebral, that gray matter of development. Once that child hits that 3-year-old mark, he's going to start really putting together language and formulating language. So language is the most important thing. Try not to do the parentanese. I know students ask me that too. Say what the word is. Speak it, say it, repeat it. They're going to learn that language and be able to repeat it back. So when it comes to cognitive development, they're learning everything about their world through a qualitative process, thick, rich description. And language is the key. They're trying to understand, they're trying to put the symbols of what you say things are with the exact word. And some advice that I've given my students in the past, give an object more than one name. Because how we are culturally, there are more language to one object. What we say pen may be la pluma in a different language. Give objects. So when they grow, they will know that objects can have more than one name, and it can be different in different cultures. So that's kind of a little bit of cultural too. Now, one of the first modes of communication, getting a little bit into the emotional aspect, is crying. Crying is one of the first modes of communication. That is the infant's only way of telling you that something is wrong. And we know, based on biology and understanding frequencies, even with different species of animals, that even the cries of an infant have different frequencies. So there's a pain cry, a hunger cry. We look at anger, we look at basic cries. So we can differentiate between each of the frequencies of that cry just based on how they come out saying it. If it's a high piercing sound, it might be pain. They may come out with an anger cry, and then have several whimpers. The difference, like even with pain, they may hold their breath a minute and then screech that pain back out again, that pain cry. So that is the first mode of communication. And if you ask a lot of mothers, they actually know and can differentiate the different types of cries with their infant. But the thing about crying and picking up the baby, the quicker the responses and the quicker the comforting, the child will eventually, because it's conditioning, remember you're still training, the child can learn to comfort themselves. So speaking as, the trainer, quick responses, we do that with animal training, and we do it very quick and we're very consistent. The animal learns, and even the human can learn to comfort themselves. It happens across the board. So comforting is very important. Something else we start to see is the development of emotions with different aspects. One way we see this is through their temperament. Now, temperament is, kind of think of it as the mood part of your personality. Let me look at my time. Okay, I'm good on time. So think of temperament as like the mood part of your personality. Now, we know about 40% of infants in the United States are born with kind of this easygoing temperament. Now, but let me kind of explain like what we mean, because somebody said last week, well, what do you mean by temperament, this mood part? First of all, it is genetic base. You don't birth a child and then the environment decides what type of temperament your child is going to have. It's pretty much genetically hardwired, and that's what you're going to get. When you think about what it means as far as temperament, it's about adaptation to different environments. When you have an easygoing child, they adapt to different environments. You can take them one place one day, take them another place the next day, and they're thrilled. In fact, those are those easygoing babies that love to go places, they smile, but they are adapting to those different environments. Now, when you look at the other two, like difficult, and that's what I had, the first one, they have difficulty adapting to those changing environments. You go to one restaurant one day and they get used to it and they like it, and then you go to another restaurant, they're like, no, I'm not doing this. And so it's more difficult to them to change at those different environments. They tend to like the routine, the same environment, that's where they like to go. Now, how does that affect people today? People can still be difficult. They can still have difficulty adapting to changes, new ways of doing things, or they may be, your picky eater. They may be the person that only wants to do things, a certain way, but it influences other traits of that personality. Now, the third personality trait, or temperament, is slow to warm up. Now, there has been some studies suggest that this is a precursor to shyness. So they're looking actually for like a shyness gene. And again, the slow to warm up, they have difficulty warming up to those changes in different environments. So you think about having difficulty to different environments. They're slow to warm up to those changing environments. It takes them a little bit of time to kind of warm up and get used to a new environment and how this works. You've seen kids maybe at daycares where they're kind of just standing there and they're not quite sure what to take. They're in like a different daycare or a different setting, and they're kind of just like frozen in time. They're not quite sure what to do. The difficult ones throwing a temper tantrum on the floor, and then the easygoing kid is loving it and making friends and just running all around. So for those of you parents, you probably know what I'm talking about. So that's part of that emotional and development. But we're born with these primary emotions, but infants aren't sure where to have them and how much. That's where you come in. They use social referencing. They're referencing how you act and what emotions that you use in specific environments. And they're referencing. I've even seen some infants like take their mother's face and turn them towards them so they can actually see like what expression their mother is having. So infants do look at faces. In fact, by 4 months, they're looking at your mouth, because your mouth is giving them an idea if you're happy, sad, anger, disgust, fear. That's the only way that they understand. And through emotional regulation, teaching that child how much of an emotion to have in situations, that begins to teach them about that interpersonal relationship and that interpersonal communication. So they use that social referencing and they use the emotional regulation to understand how emotions are supposed to work. And this will help them one day when we get into early childhood. That will be our next series, through emotional intelligence. You do still have to have an intelligence about emotions as well, so that's important. Now, some of the other studies, and a lot of studies in the emotional development in the first 3 years, up to age 3, we look at attachment. And attachment is very, very important. In fact, some researchers suggest that how you attach yourself early on has a lot to do with how you attach yourself when you become an adult. And so we can go back and look at securely attached children, insecure, ambivalent, insecure, were they resilient, where they don't know what's going on. We can look at those behavioral patterns in attachment, and kids do very early on figure out who feeds and waters them. They do know that caretaker that spends that time. And according to Erickson, that trust versus mistrust is established at this time. That infant begins to trust that person, that they will take care of them, they will comfort them, they will feed them, just the basic primary needs that we go through that first stage. And once the child is 2, because they're putting 2 word combinations together and they're talking and they're running around, is where they want a little bit more autonomy. They want to go off and do things. And I would notice this, with my son, that I would go to the park, and as long as he could see me, he was okay. And he would even sometimes come back and touch me or show me something, and then he would go back and play. And that shows you that securely attached. But it also shows autonomy. He wants to go off and do things on his own, even though he wants to know where I am. But to reinforce that, to say that's great, because if you're constantly going, where are you? What are you doing? That can also establish that shame and doubt. So again, that's Erickson's second stage. So I'm doing good in time, yay! So that just kind of gives you some terminology and some things to look for. This is the baseline. This is the foundation. Language is everything, because once they hit 3 and they're beginning to have that theory of mind, and they know or they feel like their opinions count and they want to tell you, that language is just going to double and triple at that time, and they're going to start having those communication skills. So what established the first 2 years will begin early childhood development, and they're going to be going out more, going into different environments. A lot of kids at 3 start preschool, and they have whatever they've done the first 2 years. When they're ready to hit those other environments, that's their foundation. So I hope that helps you out, because I'm going to be getting into early childhood development, and that's actually my specialization for my doctorate was Vygotsky. Vygotsky's my man, Lev Vygotsky, and early childhood cognition. So I definitely will get into a little bit about that, and maybe some of the work that I did in my research. So I hope that helps out. Hope that kind of just shows you the importance of the first 2 years, physically, cognitively, and emotionally, and all the stuff that goes on being a human the first 2 years of life. Bye.